Welcome to a longer than usual, bigger than usual Nonsense Wars production on perhaps my long awaited GBC Rock Stupid Rover slash Auto-Dozer. This is by far my largest GBC module with more than 2,500 parts and also my most complex, though, like many complicated modules, it really just combines many simpler mechanisms. I love the idea of modules where the motion of the balls is stochastic rather than deterministic, and incorporating randomness was the main reason I wanted to build this module as opposed to some other. As usual, I will talk about the development, the detail, and the theme of the module, so let's get started. Before looking at anything else, let me answer the question, what is a rock stupid rover? Essentially, it's a very simple robot with a fixed program that allows it to drive around without getting stuck. You can, of course, implement a rock stupid rover in many ways and even tune the behavior differently, but after looking at various designs, I found this one to be the simplest and most compact. The way this works is with a pseudo differential, which in some sense is a very primitive computer. The front wheels are powered and mounted in a free spinning fork. As long as the rover has nothing in front of it, the powered axle will drag it forward. If it encounters an obstacle such that the wheels can't turn, the fork will turn instead, and the fork will continue to turn until the wheels can drag the rover away from the obstacle, even if it means reversing entirely. I first built the standalone rover shown here to verify that the differential mechanism worked and worked reliably. Once that was running to satisfaction, I had to devise a way to power it externally, as I wanted the entire module to run off a single motor. The mechanism I ultimately decided upon was a pivoting, telescoping drive shaft, which transmits power but also allows the rover to cover an entire 32 by 32 space. This was the most difficult part of designing the entire module, not because the drive shaft worked poorly, but because the performance of the differential mechanism is very sensitive to a wide range of factors, from the size of the wheels to the length of the wheelbase, and most importantly, to the total weight and weight distribution of the rover. Once the rover was sorted, I needed to build components to load and unload the arena in which the rover would drive. This is where I originally wanted to use the split level stepper, but when it became clear that I needed to drop balls rather than roll balls into the arena, I switched to a derivative of my extensible tower instead. Still, adapting the tower to this module caused a considerable amount of headache, and it still may be a little buggy. Putting everything together at the end was not trivial either. I designed the module such that it could come apart for storage and transportation, and I had to build structure and drivetrain around this segmentation. Theming was added last, and even that required some mechanical tweaks, like counterbalance for the moving figure at the exit, or additional drivetrain for the radar above the arena. All along the way, testing, testing, and more testing. Let's take a look at the components of the final module now. As I mentioned, the loading tower is a derivative of my extensible tower. I had to use a more compact crank mechanism, which is unfortunately less smooth as well. This slightly alters the travel of the stepper core, and it was frustrating to find that such a small change in travel could cause it to jam regularly. Also, as mentioned, tracking down the source of these jams and patching the geometry was tedious and difficult. The exit ramp at the top is crested rather than troughed in order to increase the dispersion of balls coming out of the tower. Even though the main feature of the module is the rover is not necessarily the primary mover of balls. Rather, it's balls coming out of the tower, hitting balls on the arena floor. The rover mainly clears balls along the front and back edge of the arena and pushes other balls back toward the center, where falling balls are more likely to knock them away. And this is where the increased dispersion helps. The behavior of the balls on the arena floor changes considerably based on the pattern of the tiling, the orientation of the tiling, and the levelness of the entire module. If the module is slanted enough, the whole thing just doesn't work. Balls simply roll to the lowest side of the arena and out to the exit. Smaller tilts and unique tiling patterns will cause balls to gather and roll differently. Nonetheless, I consider this a feature as it adds to the randomness of the pooling and sweeping actions. The rover itself is fundamentally the same as the prototype, except that it is externally powered. There is a roughly 1 to 8 gear reduction within the rover, as mechanical energy needs to be transmitted with as little torque as possible. Moving the gear reduction outside of the rover and increasing the torque on the tether will hinder the rover's ability to drive straight. Also built into the rover to improve driving performance is an additional weight in the form of a dead 9-volt motor. The last part of the module is the single stepper at the exit. When I first designed the module, I thought that it could potentially flood the next module with balls on a good rover sweep, so I added this step to modulate the flow. This hasn't seemed necessary, but it nonetheless helps balance the module structurally and gives an additional opportunity for theming. Joining everything together is a rather lengthy drivetrain powered by an M motor. Gear reduction is 1:1 to the rover and 1:5 to the input tower. The output stepper is driven off the same axle as the input tower, but geared down by an additional 3 to 5. I tried to mitigate some of the jerkiness of the tower crank by joining the upper and lower drivetrain with knob gears to reduce slop. The yellow frame diverting power up to the rover is simply floating on the center drive shaft. This isn't best practice, but I think it's okay in this situation due to the low amount of torque being transferred. It's a little bit of a shame that all of this is hidden under the arena floor. I also want to show the breakup of the module for storage and transport. The three major components come apart, but even with the overhead drive shaft assembly removed, the arena is still huge, which limits the usefulness of this feature. The tower, arena, and exit are pinned together, and axles traveling between the various sections are joined using these pulley wheels and cross-axle pins. If building a GBC with substantial randomness was the main reason I made this module, then theming was a close second. I wanted to build a thing that intersected more than one of my hobbies, in this case, Lego, anime, gaming, and even transportation and history to an extent. Azur Lane is an anime-style mobile game where you collect and fight with anthropomorphic interpretations of World War II era ships. All of these structures in the module are at least loosely based on buildings in the Azur Lane port, and the characters are effectively brickheads of more well-known Azur Lane characters. Even the ship is a very rough cartoon of the actual HMS Javelin Pennant F-61, which is the basis for Javelin the character. The whole scene perhaps suggests some kind of story, but I definitely did not have anything specific in mind, and I will leave that to the interpretation of the viewer. Reliability is still up in the air, though I'm mostly worried about jams in the tower. The rover can't really get stuck, and the exit stepper should be bulletproof as well. Some parts of the drivetrain may need to be reinforced, but only time will tell. On that note, this is the end of the commentary, so have a nice day.
There's a miniature game called Gasland, and it's just a robot. There's no miniature that goes there. It's supposed to be Hot Wheels. Oh, because it's Mad Max, so you're supposed to Hot Wheels and mods them.